The stagecoach lurched through another frozen rut, and Sarah Sullivan pressed her burning forehead against the icy window, wondering if she would die before reaching Montana territory. The journey from Boston had taken 3 weeks, and somewhere along the way, probably in that filthy hotel in Kansas City, she had caught something terrible. Her lungs felt like they were filled with broken glass, and every breath was a struggle against the fever that had consumed her body for the past 5 days. The other passengers had moved as far from her as possible in the cramped coach, covering their noses with handkerchiefs and whispering prayers that they would not catch whatever plague she carried. Sarah did not blame them. If she could have moved away from herself, she would have. But there was nowhere to go except forward to Bozeman, Montana territory, where a man named Thomas Zeller waited for his mail-order bride. A man she had never met, but had agreed to marry because staying in Boston meant starving slowly or worse. Her parents were gone, taken by cholera 2 years ago. Her brother had died at Gettysburg. She had no other family, no prospects, and the factory where she had worked had closed its doors last spring. So when she saw the advertisement in the newspaper seeking a bride for a Montana rancher, she had written a carefully worded letter, enclosed the only photograph she owned, and posted it before she could lose her nerve. Thomas Zeller had written back within a month. His letter was brief but not unkind. He needed a wife. She needed a home. It was a practical arrangement, he wrote, but he promised to treat her with respect and provide for her needs. He sent money for the journey and asked only that she arrive before winter made travel impossible. She had left too late. It was the 2nd week of December, 1876, and winter had already descended on the Montana territory with a vengeance that made Boston winters seem mild by comparison. Snow covered everything in sight, and the wind howled across the plains like a living thing bent on destruction. The stagecoach driver shouted something she could not hear over the wind. The vehicle slowed and finally stopped. Sarah tried to sit up straighter to appear presentable, but her body would not obey. She slumped against the seat, her vision swimming. The door opened, letting in a blast of Arctic air that made her cough violently. Through tear-blurred eyes, she saw a tall figure in a heavy coat climb into the coach. Someone said her name, but it sounded like it was coming from underwater. Strong hands lifted her, and she wanted to protest, to say she could walk on her own, but darkness was pulling at her, dragging her down into its warm embrace. She surrendered to it gratefully. When consciousness returned, it came in fragments. The creak of a bed, the snap and hiss of a fire. A cool cloth on her forehead, voices speaking in low tones, pain in her chest that made each breath a battle. Darkness, then light, then darkness again. Time had no meaning. She floated in a fevered dream where her mother called her name, and her brother laughed the way he used to before the war took him. Gradually, she became aware of someone sitting beside her bed. A man, though she could not see his face clearly. He held a cup to her lips, and she drank bitter liquid that made her want to gag, but his voice was firm yet gentle as he insisted she finish it all. "You have to fight," he said. "I did not bring you all this way to lose you now." She wanted to tell him that she had not wanted to come, that this had been desperation, not desire, but the words would not form. The darkness pulled at her again, and she let it take her because consciousness was too painful. The fever broke on the 8th day after her arrival, though she would not learn this until later. She woke to find weak winter sunlight streaming through a window hung with simple curtains. The room was small but clean, furnished with a bed, a dresser, a washstand, and a chair where a man sat watching her with eyes the color of storm clouds. He was younger than she expected, perhaps 30, with dark hair that fell past his collar and a face that was handsome in a rough, weathered way. He wore a simple shirt and trousers, and his hands rested on his knees as if he had been sitting there for a long time. "You are awake," he said, and she recognized the voice from her fevered dreams. "How do you feel?" Sarah tried to speak, but her throat was too dry. He immediately rose and poured water from a pitcher on the washstand, then helped her sit up enough to drink. His touch was careful, almost tentative, as if he was afraid she might break. "Slowly," he cautioned as she gulped the water. "Not too much at once." When she had drunk enough, he eased her back onto the pillows and returned the cup to the washstand. He stood there for a moment with his back to her, and she saw his shoulders rise and fall as he took a deep breath. "I am Thomas Zeller," he said, turning to face her. "I suppose you figured that out. You are Sarah Sullivan, my intended bride, though the circumstances of our meeting are not what either of us planned." "How long?" she managed to whisper. 8 days since you arrived. The doctor said it was pneumonia. He did not think you would survive." Thomas moved back to the chair and sat down, leaning forward with his elbows on his knees. "You were burning with fever, could not breathe without coughing up blood. I thought I had killed you by bringing you here in winter. Not your fault." The words came easier now. "I left too late." "Why did you leave at all?" The question was not accusatory, just curious. "Your letters never said what drove you to answer my advertisement." Sarah closed her eyes, suddenly exhausted by the brief conversation. "I had nowhere else to go." She heard him stand, heard his boots cross the wooden floor. When she opened her eyes again, he was at the window, looking out at the snow-covered landscape. "I understand that," he said quietly. "Sometimes desperation makes our choices for us." He did not elaborate, and she did not have the strength to ask what he meant. Sleep was pulling at her again, but it was different now. Not the heavy, suffocating darkness of fever, but the natural tiredness of a body trying to heal. "Rest," Thomas said, as if sensing her struggle to stay awake. "I will be here when you wake." She wanted to tell him he did not have to do that he did not owe her anything, but sleep claimed her before she could form the words. The days that followed fell into a pattern. Thomas brought her meals, though at first she could only manage broth and weak tea. He helped her sit up, changed the linens when she was strong enough to move to the chair, and administered the medicines the doctor had left. He did all this with a quiet efficiency that spoke of practice, and she wondered if he had cared for someone else like this before. The room she occupied was part of a small ranch house that Thomas had built himself 3 years ago. It sat in a valley surrounded by mountains, with a barn and corral visible from the window. Thomas ran cattle, he explained during one of their brief conversations, though winter was the slow season. He had 2 hired hands who lived in the bunkhouse, and an older woman named Mrs. Patterson who came twice a week to help with cooking and laundry. Sarah learned these details in small pieces, each conversation necessarily brief, because she tired so easily. Thomas did not press her for information about herself, for which she was grateful. The story of how she came to be here was not one she wanted to tell yet, perhaps ever. On the 10th day after her arrival, she was strong enough to sit in the chair by the window for an hour. Thomas brought her a quilt to wrap around her shoulders and a cup of hot tea sweetened with honey. "The doctor will come tomorrow," he said, standing awkwardly by the dresser. "He said he wanted to check on you once more before considering you out of danger. How much do I owe him?" The question had been worrying her. She had no money beyond the few coins in her bag, certainly not enough to pay for medical care. Thomas shook his head. "It is handled. Do not concern yourself with that." "I have to concern myself with it. I cannot pay you back if I do not know what I owe." "You owe me nothing." His voice was firm. "I brought you here. Your illness is my responsibility." That is not how responsibility works, Sarah said, surprised by the flash of anger she felt. She was tired of being helpless, tired of being a burden. I am not a child. I need to know what obligations I have incurred. Thomas studied her for a long moment, and she thought she saw something like approval in his eyes. Very well. The doctor's fees came to $20. The medicines were another $5. But I meant what I said. You do not owe me anything. Consider it a wedding gift if you prefer. A wedding gift before the wedding. She looked down at her hands, which were thin and pale from her illness. Is there still going to be a wedding? The question hung in the air between them. It was the first time either had addressed the awkward fact that she was a stranger living in his house, sleeping in what should have been their marriage bed, cared for by a man who had contracted to marry her but had not yet done so. That depends, Thomas said carefully, on what you want. When you are well enough, if you still wish to marry me, I will honor our agreement. If you would rather not, I will take you back to Bozeman and put you on a stage to wherever you want to go. No obligations, no debts. Sarah looked out the window at the vast expanse of white. Where would she go? Back to Boston, where she had nothing and no one. West to San Francisco, where she knew no one at all. At least here she had a roof over her head and a man who, if nothing else, had proven himself capable of kindness. I will think about it, she said finally. Thomas nodded. That is all I ask. He left her then, and she sat wrapped in the quilt, watching snow begin to fall again outside the window. She had come here expecting to marry a stranger, to share his bed and his life in exchange for security. But illness had changed the terms. She was in his debt now, dependent on his charity, and she hated the feeling even as she was grateful for it. The doctor came the next day as promised. He was an older man with kind eyes and gentle hands who examined her thoroughly and declared her on the mend. Keep her warm and make sure she eats, he instructed Thomas. No going outside for at least another week, and even then only if the weather is mild. Pneumonia can come back if you are not careful. After he left, Mrs. Patterson arrived with a basket of food and a sharp eye that took in Sarah's appearance in one sweeping glance. You need fattening up, she announced. All skin and bones you are. No wonder you took sick. She was a sturdy woman in her 50s with graying hair pinned in a no-nonsense bun, and a manner that brooked no argument. Within an hour, she had prepared a lunch of roasted chicken, mashed potatoes, and vegetables that made Sarah's mouth water. Eat every bite, Mrs. Patterson commanded, setting the plate on a tray across Sarah's lap. And then you are going to sit in front of the fire while I change those linens. When is the last time you had a proper bath? Sarah felt her face flush. I cannot remember. Well, we will fix that tomorrow. For now, we will just get you clean sheets and a fresh nightgown. Mrs. Patterson paused, her expression softening slightly. Thomas has been beside himself with worry. Good man, that one. You could do worse. It was the closest thing to a blessing Sarah supposed she would get. She ate her lunch while Mrs. Patterson bustled about, stripping the bed and remaking it with fresh linens that smelled of soap and sunshine. By the time the older woman left, Sarah was exhausted but also cleaner and more comfortable than she had been since arriving in Montana. Thomas came to check on her that evening, as had become his habit. She was sitting by the fire, wrapped in a blanket, and he took the chair opposite her. Mrs. Patterson says you ate well today, he said. That is good. She is very efficient. Sarah hesitated, then added, She seems to think highly of you. Martha Patterson and her husband were the first people I met when I came here. They helped me get established, taught me things about ranching I would never have figured out on my own. When John Patterson died 2 years ago, I made sure Martha knew she always had work here if she needed it. He stared into the fire. She is good people. How long have you been in Montana? Sarah asked, wanting to keep him talking. His voice was soothing, and she was beginning to crave these evening conversations. 4 years now, came out after the war ended. I could not go back to Ohio, could not face the place where I grew up. Too many ghosts. You fought in the war. 3 years with the Union cavalry. Saw action at Shiloh, Stones River, Chickamauga. Got mustered out in '65 and drifted west. His eyes were distant, seeing things she could not. Montana seemed like a place where a man could start over. Sarah understood that feeling all too well. It must have been hard, building all this on your own. It was, still is some days. He looked at her then, really looked at her, and she saw something vulnerable in his expression. That is why I advertised for a wife, not because I was lonely, though I was, but because I needed someone to build this life with, someone who understood what it meant to start from nothing. Is that what you thought I would be? The question came out sharper than she intended. A partner in building your dream, I hoped you might be. His voice was steady, not defensive. But I understand if that is not what you want. You came here out of desperation, you said. That is not the foundation for a marriage. What is the foundation for a marriage then? Sarah pulled the blanket tighter around her shoulders. Love. I do not think many people in our circumstances can afford that luxury. Maybe not romantic love, Thomas agreed, but there should at least be respect, trust, a willingness to work toward the same goals. I will not hold you to our agreement if you do not think we can have at least that much. It was a fair statement, and it made Sarah realize that she had been expecting less from him. She had assumed he wanted a wife to cook and clean and warm his bed, not a true partner, but maybe she had been wrong. Can I ask you something? She said. Of course. Why did you take care of me yourself? Most men would have hired someone or asked Mrs. Patterson to do it. Thomas was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was rough. During the war, I saw men die because no one cared enough to sit with them, to make sure they took water, to fight for them when the fever tried to take them. I swore if I ever had the power to do it differently, I would. You came here trusting me to keep my word. The least I could do was make sure you lived to decide whether you still wanted to be here. Something in Sarah's chest tightened at his words. She had spent so long thinking of this arrangement in purely practical terms that she had forgotten to consider what kind of man would advertise for a wife in the first place. Not a cruel man or a lazy one, apparently. Thomas Zeller worked hard, kept his word, and valued life enough to fight for it even when it belonged to a stranger. Thank you, she said softly. I have not said that yet, but I should have. Thank you for saving my life. You are welcome. He stood, moving to stoke the fire. You should rest now. Mrs. Patterson will be back tomorrow to help you with that bath she promised. After he left, Sarah sat staring into the flames, thinking about foundations and what could be built on them. She had come here expecting nothing and owing everything. But maybe, just maybe, there was a third option she had not considered. The bath the next day was a production that left Sarah feeling like a different person. Mrs. Patterson heated water on the stove and filled a large tin tub that Thomas carried into the bedroom. Then the older woman helped Sarah wash her hair and scrub away weeks of travel, grime, and illness. You have lovely hair, Mrs. Patterson said as she combed through the wet auburn strands. Shame to keep it pinned up all the time. Not that you have much choice, I suppose. Long hair is impractical on a ranch. Maybe I should cut it, Sarah said, half joking. Do not you dare. Thomas would have my head if I let you do that. Mrs. Patterson began braiding the hair into a long plait down Sarah's back. He has been watching you like you are made of spun glass. Man is smitten, even if he does not know it yet. He barely knows me. I barely know him. Knowing someone and understanding them are two different things. You can know all the facts about a person and still not understand their heart. or you can understand their heart after just a few conversations. Mrs. Patterson secured the end of the braid with a ribbon. Thomas is a good man who has been alone too long. You are a good woman who has been hurt by life. Seems to me you could do each other some good if you are both willing. It was more direct than Sarah expected, and she did not know how to respond. Fortunately, Mrs. Patterson did not seem to expect a response. She helped Sarah into a clean nightgown and settled her in the chair by the fire, then left with the tub and dirty water, promising to return later with supper. Sarah spent the afternoon thinking about what Mrs. Patterson had said. She had been so focused on survival that she had not let herself consider what might happen if she stayed, if she married Thomas as planned. What would that life look like? Could she be happy here, in this isolated valley at the edge of the world? She had no answer. But for the first time since leaving Boston, she felt a small flutter of something that might have been hope. That evening, Thomas brought her supper himself instead of Mrs. Patterson. It was a simple meal of stew and bread, but it was hot and filling, and Sarah ate every bite under his watchful eye. "You have more color in your cheeks today," he observed. "The bath must have done you good." It did. She set her empty bowl on the tray. "Mrs. Patterson is very thorough." "She is that." Thomas stood to take the tray, but Sarah stopped him with a hand on his arm. The touch seemed to surprise them both. She pulled back quickly, suddenly shy. "I have been thinking," she said, not looking at him, "about your offer, about the marriage." He set the tray down carefully and returned to his chair, giving her his full attention. "And? I want to be honest with you. I did not come here looking for love or even companionship. I came because I was out of options. My parents are dead. My brother died in the war. I had no family, no money, no prospects." The words came faster now, like water breaking through a dam. "I worked in a textile mill for 2 years after my parents died, lived in a boarding house with 6 other women, ate 1 meal a day so I could save money. Then the mill closed and I had nothing. The man who owned the boarding house said I could stay if I was willing to work off my debt in certain ways." She saw understanding flash in Thomas's eyes, followed by anger, but he said nothing, just waited for her to continue. "I left that night with what I could carry. I slept in a church basement for a week while I looked for work, but there was nothing. That is when I saw your advertisement. It seemed like a miracle, like God had not completely abandoned me. So I wrote to you, and when you sent the money for passage, I used it exactly as you intended. I came here to marry you, to be your wife, because it was better than the alternative." She finally looked up at him, wanting him to see the truth in her face. "But these past days, you have shown me kindness I did not expect. You have treated me with respect and dignity. You have asked nothing of me. So I want you to know that if I agree to marry you now, it will not be out of desperation. It will be because I believe you are a good man, and I think I could make a good life here with you, if you are still willing." Thomas was quiet for so long that Sarah began to fear she had said too much or not enough. Then he leaned forward, his elbows on his knees, and looked at her with such intensity that it made her breath catch. "I am going to tell you something I have never told anyone else," he said. "I had a wife before. Her name was Rebecca. We married young before the war. She died while I was away fighting, died giving birth to our son, who died with her. I got the letter 6 weeks after it happened. By the time I made it home, they were already buried." Sarah felt tears sting her eyes. "Thomas, I am so sorry. I stayed in Ohio for another year after the war ended, trying to make sense of it, trying to figure out how to live with the fact that I had been gone when she needed me most. But I could not do it. Everywhere I looked, I saw her. So I came west, built this ranch, made a new life. I thought I was doing fine alone, but the truth is I have been lonely, not just for companionship but for connection, for someone to care about besides myself and the cattle. He paused, seeming to gather his thoughts. When you arrived sick, part of me was terrified that I would lose someone else, that I would fail again. But another part of me was grateful for the chance to do it right this time, to be there when someone needed me. So yes, I am still willing to marry you. But I want you to understand what you are getting. I am not easy. I have nightmares sometimes from the war. I work too hard and talk too little. I will probably make you angry more times than I make you happy, at least at first. But I will be faithful, and I will provide for you, and I will do my best to be a good husband. Sarah felt something shift inside her, like a door opening that she had thought was locked forever. This man had suffered as much as she had, maybe more. He understood loss and survival and the complicated relief of still being alive when so many were not. "I think we should marry," she said quietly. "Not because we have to, but because we both deserve a chance to be happy again. I do not know if I can be the wife you need, but I would like to try." Thomas reached across the space between them and took her hand. His palm was rough with calluses, warm and solid and real. "Then we will try together." They sat like that for a long time, hands clasped, watching the fire burn down to embers. It was not a romantic gesture, not really, but it felt like something more important. It felt like a promise. The wedding took place 2 weeks later in the small church in Bozeman. Sarah was still weak, but she insisted she was well enough to make the journey into town. Thomas drove the wagon slowly, making sure the ride was as smooth as possible, and bundled her in so many blankets and furs that she could barely move. The ceremony was simple. Mrs. Patterson and her grown son served as witnesses. The preacher, a serious man named Reverend Mitchell, kept it brief out of deference to Sarah's health. When he pronounced them husband and wife, Thomas kissed her gently on the forehead, a chaste gesture that nonetheless made her feel warm all over. They returned to the ranch that afternoon, and Thomas carried her over the threshold even though she protested she could walk. "Tradition," he said firmly, setting her down in front of the fire. "Besides, you weigh about as much as a sack of grain. Do not argue with me, Mrs. Patterson had prepared a wedding supper that far exceeded anything Sarah expected. There was roasted beef, potatoes, vegetables, fresh bread, and even a cake that must have taken hours to make. The older woman refused to stay and eat with them, insisting this was a night for the newlyweds alone. After she left, Sarah and Thomas sat at the small kitchen table, eating in companionable silence. It felt strange to be married, to know that this man was now her husband, that this house was now her home. But it also felt right in a way she had not anticipated. "I should warn you," Thomas said as he helped her back to the bedroom afterward, "that I will be sleeping in the bunkhouse for a while yet, until you are completely well and we have had time to really know each other. I will not claim my husbandly rights just because we exchanged vows." Sarah felt a rush of gratitude mixed with something that might have been disappointment. "That is very considerate." "It is practical," he corrected gently. "You are my wife now, Sarah. That means I have a responsibility to make sure you are happy, not just provided for. We will take this at whatever pace you need." He left her then, and she climbed into bed alone on her wedding night, trying to sort through the tangle of emotions in her chest. Relief, certainly. Gratitude, absolutely. But also a strange sense of anticipation, as if her life was finally beginning after years of merely surviving. The winter days passed slowly but not unpleasantly. Sarah grew stronger with each one. By the end of January, she was well enough to take over some of the household duties, much to Mrs. Patterson's approval. "About time you started earning your keep," the older woman said with a wink. "Though do not tell Thomas I said that. He still treats you like you might break." It was true. Thomas was endlessly solicitous, always making sure she was warm enough, had eaten enough, was not overdoing it. It was sweet but also occasionally frustrating. Sarah wanted to be useful, to contribute to the household in tangible ways. She started small, making breakfast while Thomas did the morning chores. Then she took over the baking, producing loaves of bread that made him close his eyes in appreciation at the first bite. She mended his clothes, swept the floors, and learned to make the hearty, simple meals that suited ranch life. But more important than any of that, she and Thomas talked. In the evenings after supper, they sat by the fire and shared the stories of their lives. She told him about growing up in Boston, about her parents and brother, about the grief of losing everyone she loved. He told her about Ohio and the war, about learning to ranch, about the isolation of Montana winters. They discovered they both loved reading, and that Thomas had a surprising collection of books he had accumulated over the years. Sarah devoured them hungrily, grateful for something to do during the long afternoons when Thomas was working outside. They discussed the books in the evenings, sometimes agreeing, sometimes arguing good-naturedly about characters and themes. Slowly, carefully, they built something between them. It was not passion, not yet, but it was friendship, and that felt like a more solid foundation anyway. February arrived with a blizzard that lasted 3 days, and left snow piled as high as the windowsills. Thomas and his hired hands worked around the clock to make sure the cattle survived, breaking through ice so they could drink, hauling hay to supplement the grass they could no longer reach beneath the snow. Sarah kept coffee hot and food ready, worried sick every time Thomas went out into the white maelstrom. When he finally came in on the third night, exhausted and half-frozen, she had hot water ready for him to wash and a meal waiting at the table. "You should not have waited up," he said, his voice rough with fatigue. "It is past midnight. I could not sleep while you were out there." She set a plate of food in front of him and poured coffee. "Did we lose any cattle?" "A few, not as many as I feared." He ate mechanically, clearly too tired to taste anything. When he finished, he just sat there staring into space. "Thomas," Sarah touched his shoulder gently, "you need to sleep. I need to go back out in a few hours to check on them again." "You need to sleep," she repeated firmly. "You are no good to the cattle or anyone else if you collapse from exhaustion." He looked up at her, and she saw something vulnerable in his eyes. "I lost so many during my first winter here. Watched them freeze because I did not know what I was doing, did not know how to protect them. I cannot go through that again." Sarah made a decision then. She took his hand and pulled him to his feet. "Come on." She led him to the bedroom, their bedroom, which he had not entered except briefly since the wedding. He started to protest, but she cut him off. "I am not suggesting anything improper, but you cannot sleep in the bunkhouse tonight. It is too cold and you need real rest. You will take the bed and I will sleep in the chair." "Absolutely not. I will not put you out of your own bed. Then we will share it." She said it matter-of-factly, as if it were the most logical thing in the world. "We are married. It is not scandalous. And before you argue, consider that I am still recovering and sleeping in a chair would not be good for my health. So really, you would be doing me a favor by letting me sleep in my own bed." She saw him trying to find a flaw in her logic and failing. Finally, he nodded, too exhausted to argue further. They lay down on opposite sides of the bed, still fully clothed with a careful distance between them. Sarah blew out the lamp and darkness filled the room except for the faint glow from the banked fire. "Sarah," Thomas's voice came through the darkness. "Yes, thank you for everything. I do not think I have said that enough. You do not have to thank me. This is what marriage is, right? Taking care of each other." "Is it?" He sounded genuinely uncertain. "I would not know. My first marriage was so brief." Sarah rolled onto her side, facing him though she could barely see his outline in the darkness. I think it is, or at least I think it should be. Not just one person giving and the other taking, but both of us supporting each other when we need it. I like that, he said softly. I like the idea of us being partners. So do I. They fell silent then, and Sarah listened to Thomas's breathing gradually slow and deepen as exhaustion pulled him under. She found the sound comforting, a reminder that she was not alone anymore. For the first time since arriving in Montana, she felt truly at home. She woke in the pre-dawn darkness to find herself pressed against Thomas's side, her head on his shoulder and his arm around her. They must have gravitated toward each other during the night, seeking warmth or comfort or both. She knew she should move, should put distance between them before he woke and found them tangled together like this. But she did not want to move. He was warm and solid, and she could feel his heartbeat under her palm where it rested on his chest. It felt safe in a way nothing had felt safe in years. Thomas stirred, and she felt him tense as he realized how they were positioned. But he did not pull away. Instead, his arm tightened around her slightly. "Sarah." His voice was rough with sleep. "I am sorry. I did not mean to crowd you." "You are not." He paused, and she felt him take a breath. "Is this all right? I do not want to make you uncomfortable." "It is fine." More than fine, actually, but she could not quite bring herself to say that. They lay like that for a while longer, neither moving, both acutely aware of the other. Finally, Thomas spoke again. "I should get up, check on the cattle. I will make breakfast." They separated reluctantly, and Sarah felt the cold rush in where his warmth had been. She dressed quickly and went to the kitchen to start coffee and cook eggs and bacon. By the time Thomas emerged from the bedroom, cleaned up and ready for the day, the food was on the table. He stopped in the doorway, just looking at her, and something in his expression made her breath catch. "What?" she asked, suddenly self-conscious. "Nothing. Just thinking how nice it is to come out to breakfast already made and you waiting." He crossed to the table and sat down. "I could get used to this." "I am already used to it," Sarah admitted. "I like having someone to cook for, someone to take care of. I did not realize how much I missed that." They ate together, their knees nearly touching under the small table, and Sarah thought about how intimate this was, this simple domestic routine. More intimate in some ways than anything they might do in bed. After Thomas left to tend to the cattle, she cleaned up and started on the other chores. Mrs. Patterson arrived around mid-morning, took one look at her and said, "Something is different." "What do you mean? You look happy. Actually happy, not just content." The older woman hung up her coat and tied on an apron. "What happened?" Sarah felt herself blush. "Nothing happened. We just talked, that is all. Talking is good. Talking is how you build a real marriage." Mrs. Patterson started pulling out ingredients for bread. "But there is more to it than that eventually. You know that, right?" "I know." Sarah focused on sweeping the floor so she would not have to meet the other woman's eyes. "We are taking things slowly. Slowly is fine. But do not wait too long. Life is short and happiness is hard to find. When you have it in your grasp, you should hold on with both hands." The words stayed with Sarah throughout the day. That night after supper, she and Thomas sat by the fire as usual. He was reading a book, and she was mending one of his shirts. It was a peaceful scene, domestic and comfortable, but Sarah could not stop thinking about Mrs. Patterson's words. "Thomas," she said, setting down her mending. He looked up from his book. "Yes, can I ask you something personal, of course?" She twisted her hands in her lap, trying to find the right words. "Do you ever think about us being married, really married, I mean? Not just sharing a house and meals." He set his book aside carefully, giving her his full attention. "I think about it constantly." His honesty surprised her. "You do?" "Yes. But I told you we would go at your pace, and I meant it. I will not rush you into anything you are not ready for." "What if I am ready?" The words came out barely above a whisper. "Or at least, what if I want to be ready?" Thomas moved from his chair to kneel in front of hers, taking her hands in his. "Then we will figure it out together. But Sarah, there is no hurry. We have time. Do we?" She looked down at their joined hands. "We thought we had time too, you and Rebecca, me and my family. But life does not always give us the time we think we have." "That is true." His thumbs rubbed gentle circles on the backs of her hands. "But it is also true that fear is not a good reason to rush into something. You have been through so much. I do not want you to feel pressured." "I do not feel pressured." She met his eyes, wanting him to see the truth. "I feel safe. With you, I feel safe for the first time in years. And I want to be your wife in every way, not just on paper." Thomas searched her face for a long moment. Then very slowly he leaned in and kissed her. It was gentle at first, tentative, a question more than a statement. Sarah answered by deepening the kiss, her hands coming up to frame his face. When they finally broke apart, both were breathing hard. Thomas rested his forehead against hers. "Are you sure?" he asked. "I am sure." He stood, pulling her up with him, and led her to the bedroom. What happened next was tender and careful. Two people learning each other, finding their way through uncertainty to something beautiful. Thomas was patient and gentle, making sure she was comfortable every step of the way. And Sarah discovered that giving herself to someone she trusted was not a surrender but a gift that was given and received in equal measure. Afterward, they lay tangled together, and Sarah felt tears slip down her cheeks. Thomas noticed immediately and sat up in alarm. "Did I hurt you?" "Sarah, I am so sorry. I thought you wanted—" "No, no." She pulled him back down, holding him close. "You did not hurt me. These are happy tears, I promise. I just realized that I am happy. Really, truly happy. I did not think I would ever feel this way again." Thomas relaxed and gathered her closer, pressing a kiss to her forehead. "Neither did I. But here we are." "Here we are," she echoed and fell asleep in his arms, feeling like she had finally come home. The rest of winter passed in a blur of happiness that Sarah would not have believed possible a few months earlier. She and Thomas settled into married life with a comfort that suggested they had been together for years, not months. They learned each other's rhythms and habits, their likes and dislikes, the small gestures of affection that meant more than grand declarations. Thomas taught her to ride a horse, first in the corral and then out on short trips around the ranch. Sarah discovered she loved the freedom of it, the feeling of wind in her face and the power of the animal beneath her. Together they rode out to check on the cattle, and Thomas explained the intricacies of ranching, treating her like a true partner rather than just a wife who needed to be protected from the harsh realities of frontier life. In turn, Sarah transformed the house from a place where a man existed into a real home. She made curtains for all the windows, planted herbs in pots on the sunny windowsill, and somehow managed to make their simple meals feel special with small touches like wildflowers on the table. But more than the physical changes, there was an emotional intimacy that grew between them. Thomas began to open up about his time in the war, about the nightmares that sometimes woke him, about the guilt he carried over surviving when so many had not. Sarah listened without judgment, holding him when words failed, and slowly those nightmares came less often. She told him about the dark days after her parents died, about the bone-deep fear of ending up on the street, about the shame she felt at having to rely on his charity. Thomas listened and then took her face in his hands and told her that accepting help was not weakness, and she had more than earned her place here by making his house a home and his lonely existence a life worth living. Spring arrived in early April with a rush of snowmelt that turned the valleys into rivers and the meadows into vast expanses of mud. The cattle grew fat on new grass, and Thomas and his hands worked dawn to dusk on the endless tasks of ranch life. Sarah discovered she was pregnant in May. She suspected before she knew for certain, felt the subtle changes in her body and recognized them from the whispered conversations she had overheard among married women back in Boston. When she was sure, she waited for the right moment to tell Thomas. It came one evening when they were sitting on the porch watching the sunset paint the mountains purple and gold. The air was warm, scented with pine and wildflowers, and Sarah felt a deep contentment settle over her. "Thomas," she said, "mm." He was leaning back in his chair, his eyes half closed in relaxation. "I am going to have a baby." He went very still. Then he sat up slowly and turned to look at her, his eyes wide. "Are you certain as I can be without a doctor confirming it? But yes, I am sure." "Probably due in December or early January." Thomas stared at her for another long moment, and she saw a cascade of emotions cross his face. Joy, certainly, but also fear and something that looked like grief. "Thomas, what is wrong?" He shook his head as if to clear it, then pulled her into his arms, holding her so tightly she could barely breathe. "Nothing is wrong. Everything is right, more right than I have any right to expect. I am just scared." "Scared of what?" "Of losing you. Rebecca died in childbirth and I cannot," his voice broke, and she felt him shudder. "I cannot go through that again, Sarah. I cannot lose you." Sarah pulled back enough to look at him, cupping his face in her hands. "You are not going to lose me. I am strong and healthy. We will get the doctor out here when the time comes, and we will be smart about it. But Thomas, you cannot live your life afraid that everyone you love is going to die. I know that in my head, but my heart does not always listen to my head. Then listen to mine." She pressed his hand to her chest, letting him feel her heartbeat. "I am alive, Thomas. I am here and I am staying. You saved my life last winter, remember? I owe you at least a few more decades." That startled a laugh out of him, breaking the tension. "A few decades, is that all?" "Well, we can negotiate for more if you are good." He kissed her then, long and deep, his hands gentle on her still flat stomach. When he pulled back, his eyes were bright with unshed tears. "We are going to have a baby," he said wonderingly. "I am going to be a father again." "We are going to be parents," Sarah corrected. "Together. And we are going to be wonderful at it because we know how precious this is." She was right, though the months that followed were not without their challenges. The pregnancy made her tired and occasionally nauseous, and Thomas hovered over her with an anxiety that sometimes bordered on suffocating. They had more than one argument about what she was and was not capable of doing. "I am pregnant, not dying," she snapped one day in September when he tried to stop her from hanging laundry. "Women have been doing work while expecting babies since the beginning of time. And some of them have died because they worked too hard," he shot back. They stood glaring at each other across the basket of wet clothes. Then Sarah sighed and set down the shirt she was holding. "Thomas, I understand you are scared. I am scared too, but you have to trust that I know my own body and my own limits. I promise I will not do anything to endanger myself or the baby, but I cannot just sit around for 9 months doing nothing. I will go insane." He ran a hand through his hair, clearly frustrated. "I do not want anything to happen to you. I know, and I love you for caring so much. But you have to let me live my life, not wrap me in cotton and put me on a shelf." "I love you too," he said, and it was the first time either of them had spoken those words aloud. They stood there staring at each other, the argument forgotten in the face of this new revelation. "You love me." Sarah whispered, "Of course I love you. How could I not? You are brave and strong and funny and beautiful. You made my house a home and my life worth living. So yes, I love you, and the thought of losing you terrifies me." Sarah crossed to him and wrapped her arms around his waist, resting her head on his chest. "I love you too, so much that it scares me sometimes. I did not think I would ever feel this way about anyone." They stood like that for a long time, holding each other, feeling the truth of what they had admitted settle over them like a benediction. The baby was born on a freezing January night during a snowstorm that made getting the doctor out to the ranch impossible. Mrs. Patterson came instead, bringing with her a lifetime of experience delivering babies and a calm competence that helped Thomas keep his panic in check. The labor was long and difficult, and there were moments when Sarah thought she might not survive it. But Mrs. Patterson coached her through it, and Thomas held her hand and told her she was the bravest person he had ever known. And finally, just before dawn, their son entered the world with a lusty cry that announced he was very much alive and not happy about the cold. Thomas cut the cord with shaking hands while Mrs. Patterson cleaned the baby and wrapped him in warm blankets. Then she placed him in Sarah's arms, and Sarah looked down at the tiny red face and felt her heart expand in a way she had not known was possible. "He is perfect," she breathed. "He is," Thomas agreed, sitting on the edge of the bed and wrapping his arms around both of them. "He is absolutely perfect." They named him Jacob Thomas Zeller, Jake for short. He had his father's dark hair and his mother's blue eyes, and from the first moment, he owned both their hearts completely. The first weeks were exhausting in a way that nothing had prepared them for. Jake needed to eat every few hours, and Sarah was so tired she could barely think straight. But Thomas was there every step of the way, changing diapers and walking the floor with a crying baby in the middle of the night so Sarah could rest. They were partners in this too, she realized, just as they were partners in everything else. One night in late February, Sarah woke to find Thomas's side of the bed empty. She got up and found him in the main room, sitting by the fire with Jake asleep on his chest. He looked up when she came in and she saw tears on his face. "Thomas, what is wrong?" "Nothing is wrong. Everything is right." He smiled through the tears. "I was just thinking about how different my life is now from where I thought it would be. A year ago I was alone, just going through the motions of existing, and now I have you and Jake and a family. I have a reason to get up in the morning, a reason to build something that lasts." Sarah sat down beside him and leaned her head on his shoulder, looking down at their sleeping son. "I was thinking something similar. When I got on that stagecoach in Boston, I thought I was running away from a life that had fallen apart. But I was actually running toward this, toward you, toward a future I could not even imagine back then." "I am glad you came," Thomas said softly. "Even though you arrived sick, and I thought I was going to lose you before I ever really knew you, I am glad you came. You are my medicine, Sarah. You healed parts of me I did not even know were broken." Sarah felt tears sting her eyes. "You are my medicine too. You saved my life in every way that matters. You gave me a home, a family, a reason to live instead of just survive." They sat together in the firelight, their son sleeping peacefully between them, and Sarah thought about the journey that had brought her here. The desperation, the illness, the long winter of recovery. The gradual building of trust and friendship that had bloomed into love. The miracle of this child who represented their future. It had not been an easy road, but it had been worth it. Every difficult moment, every challenge, had led her here, to this place, to this man, to this life she could never have imagined but would not trade for anything. The years that followed were good ones. The ranch prospered, and Thomas was able to hire more hands and expand his herd. Jake grew into a sturdy, curious toddler who followed his father everywhere and looked at his mother like she hung the moon. When he was 2, Sarah gave birth to a daughter they named Emma Rose, and their family felt complete. Life on the Montana frontier was not easy. There were harsh winters and dry summers, cattle that died and crops that failed. There were accidents and illnesses, disappointments and setbacks. But through it all, Sarah and Thomas faced everything together, their partnership stronger than any challenge that came their way. They built a good life, filled with hard work and simple pleasures. Sunday dinners with Mrs. Patterson and her family. Evenings by the fire reading while the children played on the floor, riding out together to check on the cattle when Mrs. Patterson could watch the kids. Holding each other in the darkness and marveling at how lucky they were to have found each other. On their 5th anniversary, Thomas took Sarah back to the exact spot where he had carried her from the stagecoach all those years ago. It was summer now, and the valley was green and lush, nothing like the frozen wasteland of that December day. "You remember this?" he asked. "How could I forget? I thought I was going to die. I think you thought so too." "I did," he admitted. "You were so pale, barely breathing. I remember thinking that I had made a terrible mistake, that I had brought you here to die. But I did not die. You saved me." Thomas pulled her into his arms, resting his chin on top of her head. "We saved each other. You were sick in body and I was sick in spirit. We healed each other." Sarah thought about that, about the truth of it. She had arrived broken and desperate, and he had been lonely and haunted. But together, they had built something beautiful out of their shared pain. "You were right, you know," she said. "What you told me that night after Jake was born. I am your medicine, but you are mine too. You healed my heart, Thomas. You showed me that life could be more than just survival, that I deserved to be loved and cherished." He kissed her then, slow and sweet, and she tasted the love and gratitude in it. When they broke apart, she smiled up at him. "We should get back. Mrs. Patterson will want to leave before it gets too late." "In a minute." He held her closer. "I just want to stand here for another minute and appreciate what we have. Sometimes I still cannot believe you are real, that this life is real." "It is real," Sarah assured him. "Every beautiful, difficult, wonderful moment of it." They walked back to the house hand in hand, their children's laughter drifting out to meet them on the evening air. Sarah looked at the home they had built together, at the life they had created, and felt a profound sense of gratitude. She had come to Montana as a mail-order bride, sick and desperate, expecting nothing but a practical arrangement. What she had found instead was love in its truest form, not the passionate, consuming love of romance novels, though they had that too, but the deeper, more enduring love that came from choosing each other every day, from facing life's challenges as partners, from building a future one moment at a time. She had come to Montana expecting survival. What she had found was life, abundant and full and worth living. The seasons continued their endless cycle, each bringing its own challenges and joys. Jake and Emma grew, adding their own personalities to the family dynamic. Jake was serious and thoughtful like his father, while Emma was spirited and determined like her mother. When Jake was 6 and Emma 4, Sarah gave birth to twins, 2 boys they named Matthew and Luke, and the house was suddenly very full and very loud. Thomas expanded the house, adding rooms to accommodate their growing family. Sarah planted a garden that became the envy of the county, producing vegetables and flowers that seemed to thrive under her care. She became known in the community as someone who could nurse sick animals or people back to health, and neighbors often came to her for advice or remedies. "You have healing hands," Mrs. Patterson told her one day. "Always did, even when you were the one who needed healing." It was true, Sarah thought. Somewhere along the way, her experience with illness had given her insight into caring for others. She understood what it felt like to be vulnerable, to need help, and that understanding made her better at providing it. Thomas became one of the most respected ranchers in the territory. He was known as a fair employer, an honest businessman, and a man of his word. But at home, he was simply father, the man who read bedtime stories and taught his sons to ride and carried his daughter on his shoulders when she was tired. One evening, when the twins were about 3 and Emma was 7, Sarah found Thomas sitting on the porch alone after the children had gone to bed. She sat down beside him and they rocked in comfortable silence for a while. "What are you thinking about?" she finally asked. "How different my life is from what I imagined. When I was young, before the war, I thought I knew what my future would look like. Wife, children, a farm in Ohio. Then the war happened and Rebecca died and I thought that future was dead too. But you built a different future." "I did. And it is better than anything I imagined back then. Not because it is easier or grander, but because I appreciate it more. I know how lucky I am to have this, to have you and the children. I do not take a single day for granted." Sarah took his hand, lacing her fingers through his. "I know what you mean. Sometimes I think about where I would be if I had not seen your advertisement, if I had not taken that chance. And I feel sick thinking about it because my life would have been so small and so sad. Or maybe you would have found a different path. You are strong, Sarah. You would have survived. Maybe. But survival is not the same as living, and that is what you gave me. A life worth living, a family to love, a future to look forward to. That is worth more than gold." Thomas pulled her close, and they sat together watching the stars come out over the mountains. After a while, he said, "Do you ever regret it? Coming here, marrying a stranger, building a life in the middle of nowhere? Not for a single second. Do you regret advertising for a bride? My only regret is that I did not find you sooner." He kissed her temple. "Every moment with you has been a gift, Sarah. Even the hard ones." It was true for both of them. Their marriage had not been born of passion or romance, but of necessity and survival. Yet from those practical beginnings, they had built something profound. They had chosen each other when they had no other choices, and then they had continued choosing each other every day since, until those choices became habit, and the habit became love so deep and true it felt like it had always existed. The years turned, as years do. The children grew and had their own adventures, their own challenges. Jake became a skilled rancher, learning everything Thomas could teach him. Emma inherited her mother's healing touch and her father's steady determination. The twins were wild and rambunctious, keeping everyone on their toes. When Jake was 15, he asked his parents how they met. They were all sitting around the dinner table, a nightly ritual that Sarah insisted on no matter how busy they were. Thomas and Sarah exchanged a look. "Should we tell them the truth?" Thomas asked. "They are old enough now, I think." Sarah turned to the children. "Your father and I had what they call a mail-order marriage. We did not know each other before I came to Montana." The children were fascinated and horrified in equal measure. "You married a stranger?" Emma asked, her eyes wide. "I did. I had no other choice at the time, and your father needed a wife to help him run the ranch." "But what if you had not liked each other?" Jake wanted to know. "That was a risk we both took," Thomas said. "But sometimes the greatest risks lead to the greatest rewards. I took a chance on your mother, and she took a chance on me, and we built this family together." "It sounds scary," Emma said. "It was scary," Sarah admitted. "Especially when I arrived sick and your father had to take care of me. I thought he would send me back to Boston as soon as I was well enough to travel." "Why did you not?" Luke asked his father. Thomas looked at Sarah, and the love in his eyes made her heart skip even after all these years. "Because by the time she was well, I knew I could not let her go. She was too precious." And because we realized we made good partners, Sarah added, always practical even when talking about love. We both wanted the same things in life: security, family, a home. We were willing to work for those things together. But did you love each other? Emma asked, ever the romantic. Not at first, Sarah said honestly. Love takes time to grow, but we had respect and friendship, and those are good foundations for love. The love came later, but it came strong and true, and it has lasted all these years. Matthew, always the most thoughtful of the children, said, So you are saying that love does not always happen like in the fairy tales, that sometimes it is a choice you make? Exactly, Thomas said. Love is as much about choosing to stand by someone through hard times as it is about passion and romance. Maybe more so. The romantic feelings come and go, but the choice to love someone, to be their partner through everything life throws at you, that is what lasts. The children pondered this, and Sarah could see them processing it, trying to fit it into their understanding of the world. She knew they would have more questions eventually, but for now, it was enough. As the years went by, Sarah and Thomas watched their children grow into adults. Jake married a girl from Bozeman and started his own ranch nearby. Emma trained as a midwife and married the new doctor who came to town. The twins went east to college, something Sarah insisted on even though Thomas worried about letting them go so far from home. They need to see the world beyond Montana, she said. They need to know what opportunities exist so they can choose their path with open eyes. Thomas knew she was thinking of her own limited choices all those years ago. You are right. We should give them the choices we did not have. The twins came back eventually, educated and worldly, but glad to be home. Matthew became a teacher in Bozeman, and Luke took over managing the ranch when Thomas started to slow down. As Thomas and Sarah grew older, they settled into a comfortable rhythm. They still rose with the sun, still shared meals at the kitchen table, still sat on the porch in the evenings watching the sunset. Their bodies were not as strong as they once were, but their love had only deepened with time. On the 25th anniversary of Sarah's arrival in Montana, Thomas surprised her with a gift. It was a journal, bound in leather, the pages filled with his handwriting. "What is this?" she asked. "It is our story. I have been writing it down over the past year. All the things I remember about how we met, how we fell in love, how we built this life. I wanted to make sure it was recorded, that our grandchildren and their children would know how we started with nothing but desperation and hope, and built something beautiful." Sarah flipped through the pages, reading snippets here and there, her eyes filling with tears. He had captured it all. The fear and uncertainty of their early days, the gradual building of trust, the moment they realized they loved each other. The births of their children, the challenges they had faced, the joy they had found in simple moments. "This is beautiful," she whispered. "Thank you." "Thank you," he replied, taking her hands, "for taking a chance on a lonely rancher. For surviving that first winter when I thought I would lose you. For becoming my wife, my partner, my best friend. For giving me a family and a life beyond what I thought possible. You were my medicine when I needed healing most, Sarah. You still are." "And you were mine," she said, holding his weathered hands in hers. "You healed my heart, Thomas. You showed me that life could be good again, that I deserved to be happy. You gave me everything I never knew I wanted." They held each other as the sun set over the mountains they had called home for so long. Two people who had started as strangers and become inseparable, whose practical arrangement had transformed into a love story that would be told for generations. Their children often asked them for advice about marriage, about love, about life. And Thomas and Sarah always told them the same thing, that love is built, not found, that it grows from seeds of respect and trust and shared experience, that it requires work and patience and forgiveness, that it is worth every moment of effort because a true partnership, a real marriage, makes everything in life better. They grew old together on that Montana ranch, surrounded by children and grandchildren, watching the seasons turn and the years pass. They faced losses and celebrated victories. They supported each other through illnesses and injuries, through the inevitable changes that age brings. And through it all, they remained partners in the truest sense. Two people who had chosen each other and kept choosing each other, day after day, year after year. When Thomas was 70 and Sarah 68, they celebrated their golden anniversary with a party that brought together 3 generations of family and friends from all over Montana. Emma organized it, insisting her parents deserved to be celebrated. "Look what you built," Emma said to her mother as they surveyed the crowd filling the ranch yard. "All these people, all this love. It started with you and Father, with your courage and his kindness." Sarah watched Thomas moving through the crowd, shaking hands and laughing at jokes, still strong despite his years. "It started with desperation on both our parts," she corrected gently. "But it became so much more. That is the real story, not that we found each other, but what we did once we did." That night, after everyone had gone home and the house was quiet again, Thomas and Sarah lay in bed holding hands, too tired to sleep just yet. 50 years, Sarah said wonderingly. "It does not seem possible." "Best 50 years of my life," Thomas said. "Every single day with you has been a gift. Even the hard days, especially the hard days. Those are the ones that showed me what we are really made of, what our marriage is really built on. Anyone can be together when things are easy, but we have been through hard times and come out stronger. That is the real test of love." Sarah rolled onto her side to face him, studying his beloved face in the moonlight streaming through the window. He looked older now, his hair white and his face lined. But to her, he was still the man who had carried her from the stagecoach all those years ago, who had sat by her bed and fought for her life, who had given her a home and a future when she had neither. "Do you remember what you said to me right after Jake was born?" she asked. "You said I was your medicine. I remember, and I meant it. You were mine too, you still are. You healed my heart all those years ago, and you have kept it whole ever since. I love you, Thomas Zeller. I have loved you for so long I cannot remember what it felt like not to love you. I love you too, Sarah, more than I have words to express." He pulled her close, and she rested her head on his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. "You know what the best part is? We still have time. More adventures, more memories to make. More years to choose each other," Sarah added. "Always," Thomas promised. "I will always choose you." They fell asleep like that, wrapped in each other's arms, two people who had found healing in each other's love and built a legacy that would endure for generations. Years later, when their great-grandchildren would ask about the old days, about how the ranch was founded and the family began, the story would always start the same way, with a mail-order bride who arrived sick in winter, and the cowboy who healed her heart and told her she was his medicine too. It was a story of survival and hope, of desperate choices that led to unexpected blessings, of two broken people who found wholeness in each other. But more than that, it was a story about the kind of love that endures because it is chosen daily, nurtured carefully, and built on a foundation of partnership and mutual respect. The kind of love that does not just happen, but is created through countless small moments of kindness, understanding, and grace. Thomas and Sarah Zeller lived long lives, and when the time came for each to leave this world, they did so knowing they had lived well and loved deeply. Their children and grandchildren carried on the ranch, keeping alive not just the land, but the values their parents had instilled. Hard work, integrity, partnership, and the understanding that sometimes the best things in life come from the hardest circumstances. The ranch still stands today, passed down through generations, a testament to what two people built from nothing but hope and determination. And on quiet winter nights, when snow covers the valley and the wind howls through the mountains, some say you can still feel the presence of that first brave couple, the mail-order bride and the lonely cowboy who found in each other not just survival, but salvation, not just companionship, but a love that changed everything. Their story became legend in Montana, told and retold, inspiring others to take chances on love, to see possibility in desperation, to believe that healing can come from the most unexpected places. Because in the end, that is what their story was really about. Not the practical arrangement or the dramatic rescue, or even the 50 years they spent together. It was about two people who were brave enough to try, patient enough to build, and wise enough to appreciate what they created. It was about the simple truth that sometimes the person who heals you is the one who needs healing most, and that in giving ourselves to someone else, we often find ourselves. Thomas healed Sarah's body and gave her a home, but Sarah healed Thomas's spirit and gave him a reason to truly live. They were medicine for each other, cure for wounds that went deeper than pneumonia or loneliness, balm for souls that had been scarred by loss and hardship. And in the end, their legacy was not just the land or the family or even the love story itself. It was the lesson they taught through their example. That love, real love, is not about grand gestures or perfect circumstances. It is about showing up every day, doing the work, making the choice to be there for someone even when it is hard. It is about building something together that is stronger than either person could create alone. That is what Sarah and Thomas did, starting from that frozen December day when she arrived more dead than alive, and he made the choice to fight for a stranger's life. They built a marriage, a family, a legacy that endured because it was founded on the strongest kind of love. The kind that says, I choose you and keep saying it, through sickness and health, through hard times and good, through every challenge life can throw at you. The mail-order bride and the cowboy who healed her heart. It is a story as old as the West itself, but theirs was real, lived in the mountains of Montana territory, built day by day through choices big and small. And though they are gone now, their love remains, woven into the land they tended, the family they raised, the community they served. It remains in the values passed down through generations, in the stories told on cold winter nights, in the understanding that sometimes desperation leads us to exactly where we need to be. That sometimes the medicine we need is not found in a bottle, but in the steady presence of someone who refuses to give up on us, who sees our worth even when we cannot see it ourselves. Sarah Sullivan came to Montana expecting nothing but a roof over her head and food in her belly. Thomas Zeller expected a practical arrangement, someone to help manage a household and ease his loneliness. What they found instead was partnership, healing, and a love so deep and true, it became the foundation for everything that came after. They were medicine for each other, cure and comfort, healer and healed both at once. And in the end, that is the greatest love story of all, not the one where someone rescues you and you live happily ever after, but the one where you rescue each other, day by day, moment by moment, choosing again and again to be there, to care, to love even when it is hard. That was Thomas and Sarah's gift to each other and to all who came after. The understanding that love is powerful not because it is easy, but because it is a daily choice made with courage and commitment. And that when you find someone worth making that choice for, someone who makes the same choice for you, You have found something more precious than gold. You have found home,